I've used IonQ's computer. They have the smallest quantum computer. It's only 34 qubits. Like IBM had bigger computers like 3 or 4 years ago. By the way, I read an old IBM paper. It was a lot of fun. It's one of the most cited papers. IBM has been trying to make a quantum computer for 27 years. 27 years. They finally said today that they're going to have one in 2029, but they didn't really make it clear how. They did a nice video, and I think they're earnest people at IBM. I mean, I think they're working hard. But IBM has changed their roadmap. In fact, they put these little check marks on the roadmap for like mission accomplished, right? Like target, like on goal or something like that. And it's obvious a PR guy did it because they actually literally missed their goal. They said they would do like a 300 or 500 qubit machine, maybe even 1,000 qubit machine this year. They threw that away. It's on the Wayback Machine though. You can just find it on the Wayback Machine. And they just replaced it with a new roadmap where they've hit their targets. It's like saying, I'm going to kick this 80-yard field goal. Oh, wait a second. I'm going to kick this 60-yard field goal. Hold on. I'm going to kick this 20-yard field goal. Right on target. I got it. It's a very scammy place, and tech in general can be scammy because it's hard to always kind of know what is coming and what isn't. So some people will just literally lie, and nobody will know, nobody will be any the wiser, and there's plenty of people that'll just buy it up and say that they're on to the next big thing. But we saw that before with cannabis. We saw that before with 3D printing. We've seen it over and over again in tons of little spaces in tech and not in tech. And sometimes the bubbles go crazy, sometimes they don't. But they all sort of pop at the end. I think quantum is just one of these funny things. It's sort of so hard to understand that you you don't even try. Whereas like the rest of us just can think through cannabis and be like, okay, well that's kind of like tobacco, and tobacco stocks are big stocks, so this will be like that. And obviously the revenue didn't show up for tobacco for cannabis stocks, so people sold them off and now they're penny stocks. 3D printing was the same thing. It was like, oh wow, you got a whole factory right in your home where you could 3D print something. And reality was more complicated and the revenue didn't show up. But here you have this future thing where you can always punt it. You can always say we're just 5 years away. Well, the problem with that is there have been technologies like that too. People get bored of them. CRISPR Nobel Prizes went out like 10 years ago. We still don't have any CRISPR drugs. And the ones that are planned aren't that exciting. So, it's not one of these things where, there's no such thing as an infinite money glitch. Bitcoin's probably the closest thing, right? But here it's pretty good. It's a pretty good infinite money glitch in the sense that you can always say we're just 5 years away. And once Nirvana comes, once you drink the Kool-Aid, once we go to Valhalla, we will have NVIDIA, and that's just kind of the lie being told. And the reality, if you just do, maybe a day of work, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you it's 10 minutes of work, but you do have to do like a full day of work. And if you've graduated high school, you can figure this out in a day. If you graduated, or maybe 2 days, if you graduated college, you could probably figure this out in an afternoon. It's real. There's nothing complicated. You don't even need to know algebra or anything. I mean, it's really not complicated at all. Ask ChatGPT to explain quantum computing to you in a Socratic way, and the key thing that you're going to learn is that there's no intrinsically faster thing that a quantum computer can do than a normal computer. In fact, the gate speed of a quantum computer is 1,000,000 times slower than the gate speed of a transistor. the bus speed of a quantum computer is billions of times or even trillions or quadrillions of times slower than the bus speed, which I just vaguely defined to be the amount of time it takes information to traverse within a quantum computer. There are too many zeros to name what the number is in terms of speed. So why do we want these things? Well, if they're such slow computers, who cares about them? Well, they're really interesting scientifically, and I have to admit that even I am charmed by them, and I have been since I was a kid. The idea of using quantum effects to do computation is really riveting scientifically. But practically, why would we want to use one of these super slow computers? There's one reason right now, and it's called Shor's algorithm. It turns out that with a quantum computer, you can use something called Shor's algorithm, which is just a computer program. You can use Shor's algorithm to calculate something called a biprime, or composite number that's composed of multiplying two prime numbers. You can do that really, really quickly. Right now, if I asked you to factor 35, you would say, okay, that's 7 times 5. But if I got a bigger and bigger number, eventually, even with a computer, you couldn't figure it out. Shor's algorithm, through this one weird trick, to borrow a phrase from the internet advertising world, with this one weird trick, Shor's allows you to factor a biprime almost instantly. It's like magic. I mean, I've run factoring programs on my computer. It can sometimes take days to factor like a 150-digit number or 200-digit number. In fact, the world record, I think, is like 250 digits. So our current encryption is protected by something called RSA 1024, which is 1024 bits. And we also use RSA 2048. You can use RSA 4096. In fact, there's no practical limit to how large you can make these prime number products. You can make them infinitely large. After a while, you don't want to send around these public keys that are this big. It's sort of cumbersome to do math with them. But there's no reason in principle that you can do this. Now, we've already solved this in terms of it being a problem. There's a new quantum resistant algorithm. It's not even that new, that you could just upgrade your system to, and it's secure from any quantum computer attack. But the point is, there is one place where a quantum computer can beat a classical computer, which is factoring numbers. That is not a market. There's no real big market for that. We also don't have that yet. So right now, I tried to factor a 6-digit number on IonQ's computer. It failed. They're saying, don't worry, it's coming soon. But I'm sitting here, and every 3 months I log in, try to wait. They haven't put out a new computer in a long time. They promised a new computer this year, still not here yet. I've gone to the IBM computer. I can factor a small 6-digit number on IBM, but I can't factor a large 6-digit number or a 7-digit number. So we are a really long way from getting one of these. You could not store a photo of your dog on a quantum computer, nor would you want to. It's really meant to do these really weird problems that are very, very small things. AI is different. AI is like a very general problem. In fact, you can use GPUs for just about anything and speed things up. They really are good when you have to do parallel processing, which a lot of computing requires. If you can take a job and divide it up into lots of steps, GPUs are great for that. Like if you took the whole internet and said, train an AI model, but I'm going to give this GPU 10% of the internet, and each part of the GPU is going to work on 1/50th of that 10%. And all these little workers are going to go in parallel. That's what GPUs are good for. Quantum it can't do that. It literally cannot do that. It is not made to do that. Like I said, it has very low storage, basically almost no storage. But it is very good if you set up. And again, when I say very good, I mean in theory, when it works, because it doesn't work right now, as I've explained. And I've spent my own money to test these quantum computers with quantum experts at my side. Everyone agrees these computers are useless right now, including the founder of IonQ. The current CEO of IonQ, I've never heard a more promotional guy. I mean, I think this guy is speedrunning prison. This is like the most insane thing I've ever heard. He just said he's going to be bigger than Cisco, but somewhere between Cisco and NVIDIA's market cap. The last time I heard somebody project their own market cap, which is something even I've never had the gall to do as a publicly traded company CEO, was Valiant. The CEO of Valiant said he would be he would be a certain market cap of a company. Now, you cannot predict the stock market. You cannot predict what value the market will give you. It doesn't work that way. You just
Elon does that, right? He'll say 10 trillion market cap.
yeah. I mean, I think Elon does get a small pass, but I also think it's crazy to try it. I think part of Elon's gig is also raising the confidence level of investors, getting them to believe in something really huge. And I think that it's a very dangerous game to play, even for him. I had friends who were confident he would go to prison. He has delivered. I'm a huge fan of Elon. He's my hero. But I don't like to play the game that way. I think, under promise and over deliver, is kind of the best way to do things. You keep over promising and under delivering, people start to say you're the boy who cried wolf, and other words come into play, and it's not a great thing to do. So I think IonQ is really sticking their neck out. They said that, in fact, I think 3 quantum companies in the last week have said how many qubits they'll have by 2030 and what their fidelity will be. And this is remarkable to me because we've had 5 years of no progress in fidelity in quantum. But all of a sudden, we're going to get this explosion in fidelity. And I'm struggling here because while like I said, I love the science of this stuff, and I can't wait to use a quantum computer to break Bitcoin. That's kind of why I'm so interested in this space. As a super hacker, this is like the juiciest hack of all time. And nobody knows how to actually operate a quantum computer. But I have more experience than almost anybody other than real researchers at universities. There are very, very few people that even use the AWS quantum computers. And if you look, you can see a counter of how many people have used it. I always see the counter go up because of me. And it's just fun. It's a fun hobby, but this is the only real practical use. There are no other algorithms like Shor's algorithm. If you guys know complexity at all, this isn't 100% my field. My wife is 100,000 times better at this. She got a degree at MIT with some of the masters in this space. She worked with Scott Aronson. She worked with the other big computing professor there. I'm blanking on his name, but his introduction to computing. Oh, Sipser, Mike Sipser, whose textbook on basically computational, just computer science is the introduction to all complexity for everybody. So basically what you can do with Shor's is you can go from a exponential algorithm. So this algorithm, as the size of the problem grows, the time to solve it grows exponentially, to a polynomial class problem. A polynomial class problem, as the amount of bits of the problem grows, like the amount of numbers you have to factor, the length of those numbers, I should say, the time to solve that only grows polynomially. And that's a huge difference. Some of you have heard of the P equals NP problem. This is the scale of this kind of problem. And there are no other algorithms other than Shor's that are really exciting to anybody. So there's something called Grover's. And Grover's is like Shor's retarded cousin. You get a quadratic speed up, which isn't that exciting because you can just choose a problem that's bigger than the benefit of quadratic speed up. And we're always making improvements to classical algorithms, so it's unlikely that we were going to ever see Grover's actually implemented in a way that's really useful. Right now, we have a really hard time, like I said, implementing Shor's. I have not been able to get Shor's to work on a truly quantum Shor's does not work on any current quantum computer, which is another funny thing I should add. To actually run Shor's on one of these things, you have to hobble the program into classical world and cut parts of it out of the actual fully quantum Shor's. So if you ask ChatGPT to write you Shor's algorithm that'll run on IBM's quantum, and I encourage you to do this. If you're brave enough, I would tell you that ChatGPT can help you through this. It's not easy. ChatGPT is not great at this either, but IBM's quantum cloud gives you 10 free minutes. You don't need to sign up with a credit card. You don't need to do, you just can use their quantum computers right now. And if you know Python, which many, I'd say 20% of all people, on this call know Python, you can write your first quantum program today. Now, the problem is that if you look at the examples they give, sometimes you get like a template. Okay, run this thing. Well, they don't give you a Shor's template. But quantum computers are only really built to do Shors. 27 years ago, when IBM put out their, what are those things called? The electron, the tiny quantum dots. They tried to make qubits with quantum dots. This is their first big paper 27 years ago. And if you go back then, they said that the only reason that anybody was interested in making a quantum computer was Shor's. Shor's got everyone excited. Shor's got people to say, we should actually try to build this thing. It's crazy, to break RSA or to just shift a problem to this new quantum complexity class. Wow, that's like, to a nerd, the coolest thing ever. To everybody else, it doesn't mean anything. It's not commercially interesting. It's useless. So, but go on IBM Quantum Cloud and try to write a program. Try to see what you can do today with the state-of-the-art quantum computer, and it'll help you understand what you can do with the state-of-the-art quantum computer in the future. Because you'll see how these things actually work, and you'll see that they're sort of pathetic. Now, could you envision them working better? Yes, of course. That's what technology is all about. A lot of people say, Martin, you don't understand, things will get better. Yes, of course they will. But just because something can get better doesn't mean it gets better infinitely. These are a lot of logical traps that people get confused by. Just because a plane can go faster doesn't mean it's, our jets, Boeing jets are going to go 50 Mach. Nor does it mean that, they're going to start, being able to brake instantly or do other things. There are limits to technology. And you define those limits by studying the technology themselves. And, some technologies have grown really rapidly, like NVIDIA, but to take the best case scenario and apply it to yourself is kind of crazy. When I was a teenager, I was a precocious basketball player. I'd play all the black kids in Brooklyn, and I'd win, and they'd be like, whoa, this guy's like Larry Bird. Well, I looked at my career paths, and I said, what, I don't think I'm going to be Kobe Bryant. I don't think I'm going to be Shaquille O'Neal. I don't think I'm going to be one of those guys. And I have not grown an inch since that day. And I would have never made it to even a low college, basketball position. And I made the right choice by not applying NVIDIA to myself. I didn't say I'm going to be NVIDIA. Even though, yes, people have gone from even the neighborhood I lived in to the NBA. Stephon Marbury in particular. And, I could have been Stephon Marbury. Yeah, sure. And IonQ could be NVIDIA. But the reality is you have to size it up realistically and ask yourself, is this something that's actually going to happen? And, IonQ is a really special company, but the other three stocks are also really interesting. But today I'll pick on IonQ because I've been picking on some of the other ones as well, like D-Wave, which is D-Wave and Quantum Computing Inc. are largely just, complete zeros. And it doesn't take half a brain to figure that out. I do think it takes half a brain to figure out that Rigetti and IonQ are zeros. And listening to the IonQ CEO explain that the quantum internet is going to be worth as much as Cisco. So he said Cisco's market cap is 200 billion. So my market cap, bare minimum, will be 200 billion. Because networking has to go from their version of networking to quantum networking. I've never heard more baloney. I mean, since the dot-com bubble, honestly. We don't need quantum networking because we have quantum secure protocols now. That's it. End of story. The whole thesis is blown up. Completely illogical. I mean, one sentence destroys that whole argument. Why do we need it? The NSA has literally told us if you go to Kyber or dilithium, quantum computing cannot break those codes. They're lattice-based cryptography. We don't have ways to break lattice-based cryptography, quantum or not. So in one, literally you can pip install these packages and you can make a quantum safe internet. We do not need to undo the whole internet and move it to IonQ when we can just like change the software. We don't need new hardware. We don't need HTTPQ. We could just change RSA to Kyber dilithium. And this is like literally what the NSA has said. This guy is I've never seen such a confidence man. Like he's just throwing this stuff out there, and I don't know who's buying this. You have to be a retard to buy it. But like it's very comforting to hear, oh my gosh, bare minimum, it's Cisco, which is a 20, he said on the call that it's a 20 bagger. When have you heard a CEO talk like this? It's a 20 bagger. And then if we're the next NVIDIA, it's even more than that. Well, that's really exciting to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. But, it doesn't take much to realize that it's all fake. And then when you look at the quantum computing side, they bought this company, which is interesting for sure. There's, like I said, this is one of the most interesting scientific problems in the world. That's why Microsoft is working on it. IBM has been working on it for 30 years. Google's working on it. The biggest people in tech are working on it, not because they necessarily think it's going to be a big market. I think they think that it's a really interesting problem. And it is. The first people that will wrestle quantum effects into a computer will be remembered forever. The first people that wrestle, the things that Einstein was famous for. We still know Einstein's name. How many people do you know who were living 100 years ago? Not too many. Einstein was going to be remembered forever, partially for his work in this space. And even some of the people who are more important in quantum won't be remembered. People like Schrodinger. But the people who at IBM or whatever company that does it, that can actually run a Shor's algorithm and factor a really big number, they'll be remembered forever. They'll win Nobel Prizes or Turing Awards, and it's going to be a huge milestone in technology and science. Will it be a business? That is another story. AT&T ran Bell Labs, maybe the most prolific research lab of all time. They invented C, the transistor, Kelly criterion. Those are not even the biggest accomplishments they did. But AT&T did all of this in a little lab near Princeton, New Jersey, where they just hired every super genius. And they even hired a guy named Jan LeCun, who is sort of the godfather of AI in a way. And none of this ever made $1 for AT&T, ever. Not $1. And it was just something where they said, we just want to do cool stuff. We make so much money as a telephone company that, we feel like we're at the vanguard of technology. Who else but us? IBM was doing similar stuff. You remember when IBM did Deep Blue, for example. IBM often referred to themselves as the leader in AI as well, which is obviously a title they lost. It's doing technology for technology's sake is what I do. I love it. I want to do it for the rest of my life. But I think you have to be a little bit more sober when you're talking about stocks and trading stocks. And what I just heard from Niccolo De Masi, the CEO of IonQ, is I've never heard a CEO that promotional. And I hope somebody recorded it, because it was this little space that was a quarter of our size of this space. So I'm not the CEO of IonQ, but nobody was really listening to this except, from what I can gather, a couple of retail investors. And listening to it, I was disgusted because the guy said, well, I'm going to take over Cisco, and I'm a 20x my stock when I do that. And I'm just sitting here like, no, networking, computer networking is not going to change. I cannot fathom a situation where you would need quantum networking, other than maybe a national security situation where you can make a quantum line, where you get eavesdropping detection and all this stuff. But in reality, there's no obvious case for quantum networking. And on the quantum I think his quantum networking stuff is largely a distraction from the fact that quantum computing is going nowhere. They've not been able to release even a 100-bit quantum computer, 100-qubit quantum computer. They haven't been able to get gate fidelity to, say, 99.999. Interestingly, a group at MIT has been using fluxonium quantum computing to get to those gate levels. So I would argue that industry is far behind academics, and fluxonium is actually the real sauce right now. But independent of that, it's scientists will search for glory. That's what scientists do. It's what financial people do too. We all want glory in our own way. But there's no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. The same way that there's no pot of gold at the end of the person that first crystallized TNF or discovered, the first, gene that regulates, NF-kappa B or something. Those are important proteins in the body, and they're Nobel Prize winning stuff, but nobody made $1 off of it because it's science. We search and do science for scientific reasons. So in terms of IonQ, again, I encourage you to try a quantum computer on IBM site. And what you'll see is you cannot store even a photograph of the dog or a second of audio on one of these computers. The only thing they're really good for is setting up a really complicated math problem. If you ever tried to do like 2 to the 100th power, that's a really simple expression in math, but it's actually very much impossible to do. And if you tried to calculate Busy Beaver 6, Busy Beaver is a very weird computational algorithm where leading quantum theorist, who by the way believes all this stuff is bullshit, leading quantum computing theorist Scott Aaronson is his favorite pet problem. I'd encourage you to read Scott Aaronson's thoughts on D-Wave, where he basically thinks the entire thing's a scam. But Scott Aaronson's Busy Beaver question is I have a comment in here. I'll respond to it in a second. Busy Beaver is something that could be addressable by quantum, but these are things that are like just adding and multiplying numbers in a really bizarre way that's never actually useful, but very computationally intractable. If you think about what computers do, they're doing the things that we want them to do. Do you ever sit at your desk and say, I really need more compute? I really need 1,000 times more compute? No. Who does that? Well, my wife works at OpenAI, and they do that. They're one of the few companies in the world that says, I need more compute. I can't solve my problems right now with computing. I need more compute. OpenAI has no interest in quantum computing. Zero. I confirmed that yesterday. So if the leading AI company says quantum's no good for us, what are these things good for? And again, I strongly suggest you try to work on one of these computers. It sounds really complicated and difficult, but if you want to do due diligence on your investments, I like to try the product. Now, I don't do that in pharmaceuticals, but I do think if possible, you try to buy the product, talk to people who've used it, join a little community of quantum developers that, there's discords, there's places you can chat. Even in my Discord, we do some quantum computing together. And figure out what these things are all about, and you'll realize that you're working at the lowest level. You're probably working at the same level that people worked at with vacuum tubes or drum memory or things like this, where you're really manipulating individual bits. And this isn't something you're going to have a lot of fun with. Could it one day be built up into a higher level language? Absolutely. There are things like Qiskit and others, but even those are mostly extremely low level individual bit manipulations. And you'll realize that unless this scales 100 billion x, it won't have the same properties as a computer. But more importantly, if you study Sipser's Complexity or any other book, or just watch a video on YouTube about complexity, you'll realize that quantum computing isn't about picking up where Moore's law left off. That's like a common misconception that charlatans will throw at you. Quantum computing is about being able to do different complexity class problems. Can you do certain problems that are exponentially difficult and shift them, because of the uniqueness of a quantum computer, shift them into a polynomial class problem? That is the main idea of a quantum computer. The problem is that there are very few problems in reality that correspond to that. D-Wave is a funny example where quantum annealing is not proven to shift complexity classes. The quantumness of quantum annealing for QUBO, which is the quadratic unconstrained binary optimization, sounds fancy, but QUBO is just pushing lots of variables into an optimal state. So it's like adjusting a lot of knobs to get something perfect. QUBO is not simple, it's pretty complicated, but it is something that you can run. And people run QUBO every day on laptops, on desktops, and even on more complex machines, but they've never been able to show that they can run QUBO faster. And the reason is transistors are really fast. Qubits are really slow. And D-Wave, we've caught them in the act using classical compute to pretend that their quantum computer is helping. And every time you poke at one of these quantum companies and poke at their work, you notice that it's actually all classical. The quantum isn't adding anything. It's there for show. It's just marketing. And you will get companies who will be suckers that will take a look at this stuff. If you've ever worked at a major company, you'll notice that lots of money is wasted all the time on all kinds of nonsense. You might have 2 ERP systems. You might have, a lot of procurement of stuff you'll never use. It happens at big companies. And all it takes is a call in to somebody and saying, hey, do you want to try quantum for your problems? And they say, you know what? I got a huge budget. I'm sitting here at some big company. You know what? I'll take a meeting. And the meeting happens and the quantum company says, it'd be really good if we could get MasterCard on our website. That would be really nice. That'd be sick. And they just beg and plead for doing a demonstration. And they do the work, maybe spend even millions of dollars. And eventually MasterCard or some other company gets convinced to write them a small fee for their work, but they never use the product in production. And if they do, it's usually just classical doing the work. That's the case with D-Wave at least. I don't know of anybody that's using IonQ in production. I don't think those machines do anything. And I think that IBM's recent video, they put this out today, and I encourage you to take a look at it. They basically tell you that quantum doesn't do anything today. And they have the biggest and best quantum computers right now. Watch that video and you'll see the guy says, he kind of shrugs his shoulders and he says, the reason quantum doesn't work right now, or the difficulty with quantum right now, is fidelity. And that's right. But it's nice to see somebody actually point it out. And then if you listen to the founder of IonQ, who I would trust infinitely more than this guy Damasi, who I want to take a shower every time I listen to him. And again, consider the source. I think that the founder of IonQ has said it's a lot longer way to wait, and we don't know how to scale these computers, and their fidelity is limited quite a bit by error correction and laser technology, both of which we don't know how to escalate. So I think the fact that IonQ is saying we're 5 years away from success is really funny, because I think that it's one of these timelines that's not too far away to scare an investor. And by the way, they don't have any institutional investors. It's all retail people who have suckered and fell for this line. Every institution is short the stock or will stay so far away from it that they're just very, very nervous about it. Again, is Fidelity in any of these stocks? Is any big hedge fund in any of these stocks? Can you talk to somebody in Wall Street that's like really excited? No, it's your dentist, it's your doctor, it's your promoter. It's not professionals that have looked at these companies and said anything but, holy shit, did you see this or that? Oh my God, I just had a meeting with IonQ and what a disaster. This isn't what everyone says on Wall Street. But if you listen to them, literally, the guy just said that we're going to be Cisco because we have quantum networking and they have old networking, so we're going to take Cisco's market cap. And if you compare that to our current stock price, we're 20x bigger. So we're going to be a 20 bagger. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you get sent to jail for. I mean, my jaw dropped listening to that. But in any event, I encourage everybody to try to use a quantum computer. If you know any Python, you can run a quantum computer, which is really cool. The first quantum computer programs that you can run that are like reasonable and interesting are only like 10, 15 lines of code. And you can ask ChatGPT to break down each line of code. The last time I tried it with ChatGPT, it didn't work great because the programming language, which is Python, and the package, which is called Qiskit, is IBM's package, which is very popular across the quantum industry. And IonQ uses it as well. Qiskit has gone through a lot of changes as IBM has kind of fumbled it quite a bit. So there's a lot of versions of Qiskit, and you're going to run into these situations where ChatGPT tells you to write a certain line of code, and the compiler will tell you, no, that's been deprecated or it doesn't work that way. And you'll have to sort of go through it. But if you want, you can also go to my GitHub. I've posted a bunch of scripts that run on IBM's quantum computers. And it won't take you more than an afternoon to see that there's nothing here. that the best these quantum computers, quote unquote, can do is factor a number like 65,411. It's really great at that. But if you add an extra number to that, they will fail. And if you try to multiply two large numbers in a quantum computer, that won't work either. They can't crop a photo, right? These aren't computers that do things like that. Somebody mentioned in my chat that, well, NVIDIA can't do those things either. And that's not true. NVIDIA's computers are general purpose computers. You can do almost anything on an NVIDIA. You can run an operating system on a GPU as well. They're optimized to do parallel processing of large data streams. And that's why they're useful for AI. When I hear people say quantum AI, I really have to laugh, because if you've ever run, say, PyTorch or any program in quantum computing, in artificial intelligence at all, you know that there's absolutely no use. So when you run a neural network, you have to keep it in memory. And keeping it in memory, these neural networks are usually tens of gigabytes or more. There's only a couple hundred qubits on the best quantum computers. IonQs, unfortunately, only have 30 or 40 qubits, which is pathetic. But in 30 or 40 qubits, maybe I could write your name, maybe your social security number. I think you'd run out of space by then, actually. Your full name might fit on an IonQ computer. Maybe. So I wouldn't get that excited about it. Now, the goal is that, they have new acquisitions coming up. Those acquisitions will make this work. They're going to add this technology and that technology. And, by the end of it, it's going to be an amazing thing. Again, the problem isn't that technology won't advance. Of course it will. The problem is that building a computer out of wood is possible. Alan Turing did it. You can build a computer out of steel. You can build a computer out of anything that has a gate. But you don't want to do that because we have really fast gates. And even on a theoretical basis, nobody has ever claimed that a quantum computer will have faster gates or faster processing speed in any way than a traditional computer. The reason scientists like quantum computing is the complexity class shift. Complexity makes even the most hardened scientists' eyes spin. It's not a fun subject. Once you start talking about p-space, does p equal np, bounded quantum polynomial time, it's enough to make your head spin. And Scott Aronson's wonderful book, Quantum Computing Since Democritus, is an attempt to introduce this relatively easily. But it's a really hard book to read. And if you try to go through Sipser's book, which is, as I mentioned, my wife worked with him at MIT, it's not that easy either. And there's a reason this stuff's really hard. It's easier to believe, quantum computing, that's a faster NVIDIA, right? And faster is better, right? But you're being a total retard when you do that. You're neglecting, reality. And reality is the only thing that scientists, like my wife and other people like that, care about quantum computing is the complexity shift that you can go from one class to the next. If you can shift from polynomial time, from exponential time, you've completely enabled a new problem. If you've ever done any computer science, you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, it's really hard to explain. And that's why, again, I encourage you to watch a video or two on complexity, and you'll, I think, gather the idea that some problems are harder than others. And if you map like the millions of potential problems there are a few of those problems. And in fact, unfortunately, there's just one where quantum can do it faster. And that problem is factoring integers. And that makes it really hard to be excited about quantum computing because nobody's saying it's going to be faster than NVIDIA. In fact, I would say that's impossible. Imagine trying to invent a new kind of transistor. Our transistor works at the speed of light. You really can't beat it. Its clock speed is 5 gigahertz. It's got billions of threads, millions of threads of work that it can do. How do you beat that? Nobody's claiming that's going to happen. But I think when the guy just does a call and just talks about NVIDIA the whole call, instead of talking about his own company, it's just so disingenuous and pathetic. By the way, anybody can call in and make a comment or two if they want, especially anybody that wants to battle and make the claim for the company. I would love to debate Nicolo himself, but it would devolve into a bit of a shouting match. But I feel like talking to people in the quantum industry, they're in it for the science. Nobody wants to do this for commercial glory. Nobody thinks there's a commercial opportunity. Drug discovery is a funny space. I happen to know a little bit about it. Most of drug discovery's bottleneck is in clinical trials. You have to get people to give a drug. It's really painful. It takes years. You have to get doctors and nurses to sign up to do a really tedious and laborious job. That's the hard part about drug discovery. It's very easy, once you know the drug target, to make a drug. In fact, there's no open problems there. Every chemist on the planet knows how to make a drug once he has a crystal structure, he or she has a crystal structure, some assays, etc. The idea that we need a quantum computer to help us is a little bit disingenuous, to say the least. What's up, Mike?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I just want to clarify by saying that I'm a quantum bear. But I do have some sort of things that I've heard in the past, and I kind of want to go over with you, and maybe you can clear it up for me because I'm not as technical as you when it comes to this topic. But when it comes to quantum, a lot of people will argue that technology it was one of those exponential things. The amount of time that we went from using the discovering and using the wheel to flying planes, and then going from prop to jet, it's all exponential.
Yep.
So one of the biggest arguments I'm hearing is that this is going to be one of those exponential jumps that's going to happen a lot sooner than we think. What do you think? What would you say to those people that think that we can make that leap a lot quicker or sooner than you anticipate?
It's a lot. There's probably a good fallacy. There's some fallacy website where debate nerds go on and name the fallacy. I don't know that stuff. I don't know what the difference between steel man and straw man is. I don't.
Slippery slope.
Exactly. Yeah. I call this the menu problem. So the waiter gives you a menu of things, and you assume that's the only list of things that there is. So you look at the menu and say, see quantum computing, and you say, wow, that's the future. That's going to grow and become the next big thing. There's CPUs, then there are GPUs, now there's going to be quantum. And the problem is you're not seeing the whole menu. Why don't you think DNA computing is going to be bigger than quantum computing? Why don't you think optical computing is going to be bigger? Why don't you think thermodynamic computing is going to be bigger? Why don't you think NVIDIA is going to not figure out the next big thing? Because they are working on it. You see the quantum computing stocks and you basically want to gamble. That's the reason. You retro-causally decide that quantum's the future when there's lots of people working on different kinds of compute that are honestly more promising and a lot more open-ended than quantum, which is, again, most scientists agree is it's a Shor solver. You're investing in a Shor solver. Because if you can show me another problem that has a true speed up over classical, like I said, that's a Nobel Prize, but nobody can really point to one. Shor's is the place where you can get the massive win that people are talking about. They take that and conflate it to other things. So if you look at biotech, space I know pretty well, gene therapy has been around since the 80s, and it always promises to be this precision win where you can install a new gene that a dying person is missing. I had a friend die of cystic fibrosis. I've had friends die of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's such a great promise, but it doesn't work. It's the only problem. It looks great on a television screen. It looks great on an investor newsletter. It looks great on a pitch from some guy that doesn't know what he's talking about. It sounds fantastic. The virus goes in, delivers the gene that you're missing, boom, you're saved. Unfortunately, technology is hard to actually make work. In this case, there's immunogenicity. There's tissue tropism. There's the size of the payload. You have to learn it. It's a technical space. So if you just went into gene therapy saying, oh, it sounds great, awesome, instead of asking critical questions, you'd realize it's a space that has some promise, but largely has been really disappointing. CRISPR is the same way. CRISPR, there was so much success and excitement about CRISPR. Walter Isaacson wrote a book about Jennifer Doudna. It was such an amazing discovery, but what have we gotten out of CRISPR? Still not a single drug. Stock market prices of the stocks involved in CRISPR have plummeted. You would have been a fool to rush and go buy CRISPR stocks when the CRISPR announcements were happening. That's when the CRISPR stocks peaked. So consider Consider that, the lay excitement about something is often the peak of the real thing. And we ask scientists at Pfizer or Merck, is CRISPR really going to change medicine? And they sort of shrug their shoulders and say, well, there are a lot of technical problems. CRISPR can't get to tissues. It's extracellular in general. It's a huge machinery. It can't really swim into cells. You probably have to pack it into a gene therapy. Now we're back to the gene therapy problems. There's a reason drug companies haven't gone all in on CRISPR. It might be 20 or 30 years before we figure out how to harness CRISPR. I hope this is sinking in, because it's the same thing with quantum, of course. It may be 20 or 30 years, and 20 or 30 years ago it was 20 or 30 years. We just keep finding new problems that get in our way. So the surface error, the surface code error correction scheme by Google started this whole rally. IBM is now saying that they have a better surface code, and they're calling it the gross code or something like that. And that looked really interesting. But again, they actually have to do it. And you might say, well, Martin, by the time they do it, they'll have solved the problem. And that's right. If they can actually do it and implement it and scale it, they'll have solved the problem. And we can be able to factor Shors. And I will take all of Satoshi's Bitcoin. It's going to be great. But nobody else is going to buy a quantum computer to hack Shors. So I think that, it's a very, very, weird space if you understand it. And if you want to close your eyes and sort of just pretend you understand it, it can be very exciting. But I'd rather live in reality. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah. Quick question though, but with a quantum computer, is there a way to store like short-term memory? Like with a regular computer, you need the RAM, but with quantum, there's no such thing. So it's kind of what you get is what you get.
Yeah, that's why it's useful for specific problems where it's like, what variable, like imagine setting up a problem like a linear combination. And you say, I've got 10 variables and I want a desired output. What are the coefficients of these linear combinations? Now, unfortunately, that's really easy to solve on an actual regular old computer. We solved that problem a long time ago. But if you imagine a quantum computer, it sort of works out like that. You'd say, my outcome is maximal profit. I have 600 stocks. What is the weight that I need to apply to each stock? And the quantum computer does its magic and figures out the answer in a blink of an eye when any old other computer could never do it. Sounds exciting. But the problems where it can do that right now are limited to like literally just Shors, which is a cryptographic problem that has been solved and has moved on. So I feel like we're pretty far away from a place where we can think about quantum being more broadly useful until you can shift complexity classes on new problems. You have Grovers, and you have what I call like new extensions of Grovers, which are largely still just Grovers, and they don't get you from exponential time to polynomial time. You're still in the exponential regime, which doesn't help you if you're trying to solve a problem. It may make some problems more tractable, but so will Moore's law. You don't need a quadratic speedup in most problems. Most Monte Carlo problems or other optimization problems are solvable on a laptop. There's very few people that need bigger computers. Some people think that maybe weather forecasting, there are a couple of places where you do need to like manage billions of variables at once, and it's really hard for combinatorial explosion to keep those all on track. But even then, you're still suffering from the limitation of memory on quantum compute, where how are you actually going to update the circuit in real time? Quantum computers are one of these weird things where you have to set up the circuit. It's like an FPGA. You have to set up the circuit once. You can't like have a program that can easily you can easily close down or launch another program. It just doesn't work that way. The whole program has to be self-contained and run start to finish with no problems. And for that reason, there's not a lot of like flow control or not a lot of typical stuff in computing. You're really more just looking at cracking like one weird problem. Again, this could change, but as a programmer who's worked with a lot of GPUs, and my girlfriend who's worked with maybe the biggest GPU cluster in the world, we don't see where and how you would want to use a quantum computer other than for cracking cryptography, which I have a bunch of GPUs in the cloud that do this, and I work on this on the weekend. If you go to my Discord, you see me hacking away at a problem called elliptic curve cryptography, and the GPUs can't do it, and I can't wait till I can run them on a quantum. It's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, just being able to reverse the key, which is just changing one number to another, to me is going to be like winning the Super Bowl. Not because I'm going to take Satoshi's money or something like that, but scientifically, it's just something that wasn't possible before, and it's going to be possible. And to me, it's going to be the greatest feeling in the world. But to most of the rest of us that don't care about elliptic curves, it's irrelevant. There's no business here. But again, I'm a nerd. I'm a scientist. I love this stuff. This will be exciting to me. But even then, I'm not. I don't think we're getting it in 5 years.
But like so IonQ recently did an acquisition for Oxford Ionics, and I think you previously mentioned that in the space of quantum itself, like there are some companies that are privatized and they're in their own kind of bubble, and the only reason why these stocks are pumping is because it's the only thing people can actually put their money in, which makes sense. But what is your thoughts on IonQ's recent acquisition on Oxford Ionics? Is it going to give them an edge in any way? And one thing I wanted to add is it possible to optimize current problems or even future problems into a method or into a way that a quantum computer can actually interpret and solve using its strengths?
Yeah, both good questions. I don't think IonQ changes anything. I think they're getting a collection of smart people, no doubt about that, and that's great. But Quantinium seems to be in the lead on ion trap computers, and IonQ has just done 6 acquisitions, which, as a former publicly traded company CEO and a current privately traded CEO, I can tell you, doing acquisitions is one of the most distracting things in the world. It's not a lot of fun. The juice has to be worth the squeeze. Acquisitions can ruin companies because you have to integrate. You have to bring all the new people in. You have to see who's who, what's what. I certainly would never recommend doing more than 1 acquisition at a time, and I would condemn the idea of doing 6 at once because as just completely crazy. Imagine integrating 6 ERP systems, 6 procurement systems, the 6 HR people that have just joined you. You have to do a lot of busy work for no reason. Some acquisitions take years to integrate. So I think it's kind of crazy to do 6 acquisitions and pay stock for each of them. If IonQ is something valuable, why give it away? If the company had something really valuable, then I wouldn't be printing my stock out like it was, toilet paper. I'd be clutching it closely and saying, I'm going to treat these shares as preciously rare and valuable tools. Instead, just printing the stock off like it's garbage, giving it to anybody who will take it. I think that speaks volumes. And if that's true, just buying a couple $1 billion of stuff doesn't mean you're worth $10 or $12 billion of stuff. So I heard from one person who bid on one of their acquisitions that they paid double what they offered. And then I heard that the last raise for Oxford was 10 times lower in price, 10x lower. So to me, I think IonQ is just trying to get rid of its stock while it's still in the 40s or 30s, because they know that there'll be a quantum winner again. When this stock was a single-digit stock, we'll be right back to that when there's no actual users or customers of the shit, and people realize there's no organic growth, and there's no organic revenue in the company. Everyone will realize that, okay, quantum is actually not here this year. Next year, let's wait a couple of years before we revisit it. The stocks will crash, but at least he'll have some assets, some other cash, whereas Rigetti or someone like that may just go broke. So it's not a stupid thing from a survival perspective, but it also lays bare the truth, which so far folks have ignored because it's the next NVIDIA or it's the next Cisco, which again that kind of narrative doesn't worry me at all. In fact, it would worry me if Nicolo sat there and talked science. I'd get scared because he'd actually be trying to explain that, well, Martin, one day, we have Shors right now. And yeah, people have looked for 40 years and haven't found something like Shors since. But when somebody finds a new Shors, our computers become more valuable. And that's true. Maybe there will be a new Shors algorithm. Maybe it'll be in a problem set that's really important. But so far, you saw Jensen at his own conference inviting the IonQ people up and other folks, and he said, you don't need a faster solution to traveling salesman. Traveling salesman is the quintessential NP hard problem, and we have great approximations for traveling salesman. There's no real great way to solve traveling salesman perfectly, and even quantum computers don't pretend that they can do this. There's no complexity class change. So in terms of Oxford, I don't think there's anything there. Can you remind me your first question again? Your second question?
Yeah, my second question was regarding problem optimization.
Oh, yeah.
So is it possible to,
Yeah. So this is the dream, is that you can take a problem that's not Shor's and Shorify it and then get it to be solvable by a quantum computer. Trust me, I've tried this. It is a really good idea, and it probably will bear fruit at some point. I think that it's not trivial, and people have taken this with Grover's, which is just a quadratic speedup. So that means that if a problem takes 100 steps, it can do the problem in 10 steps, which is a fast speedup. But if I give you a problem with 100 quadrillion steps, you haven't gotten much of a speedup. It's still intractable. So, and Grover's is not something that's easy to implement, and no one's really made a practical use of it yet. But Shor's is something that is really amazing. It turns an impossible problem to a 1-second solution. That is cool. To a computer scientist, that is kind of the coolest thing in the world. You might do biology and you see a DNA replicate or something, you might say, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. Or CRISPR edit, excise and edit, or a base, flip a base pair or something like that. And you might think that's cool. To a computer science person, going from a problem that all the computers in the universe combined, squared, could not address in a billion years, to a problem where you just press a button and it's done, that's really, really neat. But the problem is really boring. And so can we take a cool problem and put it into this form and get an answer? The problem is, again, I want you to take a step back and think about computers in general. There are no problems we have in computing today that are bound by computational complexity. The problems we have in computing today at XAI, at OpenAI, and others is gathering the world's information, siphoning it into a distillable format, and then adjusting these. Sorry, I have a fire outside my office building. And putting it into a neural network where the neural network is adjusting each weight and each bias of 100 billion neurons. Now the problem with that is that we would need 100 billion qubits, and we struggle to make 100 qubits or 1,000 qubits. Decoherence means that these computers can't even stay entangled for a second. So the program has to run really quickly. But the problem is, if you're training a neural network, you've got to shove all this data from the disk to RAM to VRAM in the case of GPUs, and recycle it and spread it across a whole network. You can't do that with a quantum computer. Like, I don't think there's anybody in quantum computing that thinks, honestly, that will ever do that. Because, as Jensen said, and if you want to learn more about this, I would watch the Jensen interview at GTC, where he had the 10 quantum computing CEOs up for half an hour. He brought another 10 up, and then he brought another 10 up. It's partially a roast where he's just sort of making fun of them, but he's also asking questions and learning the same way we are. And I think if you watch that, you'll get a really good understanding of what quantum is and what it isn't. And I think that nobody in their right mind thinks that quantum is some solution for all computing problems. And it's certainly not a solution for a large data problem like AI. And I think people see the AI boom and they say, I want to get in on something like this. Well, quantum is not that. Quantum is for scientists, mathematicians, nerds, hackers, people who want to do stuff with really big numbers, like Busy Beaver, Traveling salesman. Traveling salesman is a funny one. So traveling salesman is easy to understand. There's a salesman, a door-to-door salesman who has to make 100 stops. What order is the fastest order for the salesman? This turns out to be a really, really complicated problem because of exponential calculation. If there's 100 stops, that means you're raising to the power of 100. If you take any number and raise it to the power of 100, it's enormous. And if you had to calculate each path, it's like the brackets in NCAA. Buffett said, if you get it right, I'm giving you $1 billion or $1 million. Nobody's ever gotten it right. Why? Well, you're raising 2, because it's a binary event. Team A wins or team B wins. So you're raising it to 2 to the 32nd power just for the first round. Then there's a couple more rounds. It's like 2 to the 64th power. Your chances of winning that are not computationally like even explainable. They're not even like the lotto. The lotto it's like winning the lotto every day for the rest of your life. It's impossible. And so traveling salesman turns out to be this really tough problem to get exactly right. But the funny thing is, if you know your city, I know New York City, and Harlem's at the top of New York City, and the World Trade Center is at the bottom of New York City. And maybe there's 100 stops in my traveling salesman problem. But I know that I'm not going to go from the World Trade Center to Harlem and back. I know, generally speaking, kind of what's going to be a good solution. And in computer science, we want maybe the perfect solution because we're curious. But FedEx doesn't do any business with IonQ or D-Wave or any of these companies. People that have a lot of packages and a lot, like airplanes are even worse. Scheduling airplanes. They don't do any business with quantum. These guys need it the most. Optimization is critical for these guys, but they can do it on a computer. They don't need high compute. So this whole industry is fugazi. Like there's just nothing here that's really exciting. As a scientist, it's the coolest, funnest stuff in the world, and it's some of the most complex stuff in the world. So you go to MIT or Oxford and you strut your stuff and you say, I'm smarter than all you guys. Cool. What are you going to work on? You're not going to work on, something simple like biology. It's just a joke. You're not going to work on something simple. Even like computer science. You might work on something like quantum computing. You're going to say, I'm going to do the hardest thing in the world. I'm going to make nature factor a prime number. And
one more question.
Some people want to do that.
And this is about just kind of like news events and things catching on quicker.
Yeah.
Recently, like this was yesterday, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, he recently spoke about massive investment in the military and quantum computing. He specifically mentioned quantum computing. And also I heard a few things from, obviously Trump and, they're talking about quantum computing as well. Because I know you're on a heavy short position and very bearish on quantum. Are you afraid that you're getting in way too early? You're going to jump in right when the fire is about to start?
No,
because once you start hearing, hearing the bus driver talk about it, it signs that it's maybe closing down. But
I think the bus driver, and the dentist are talking about it. This isn't my first rodeo. I remember cannabis stocks. I was shorting cannabis stocks from prison, and Tilray was $200. It was peak cannabis fever, and Tilray's like 50 cents now. And this is the same thing. Now, whether IonQ is a $10 billion or $12 billion company, it's going to be a $50 billion company, and then it's going to go to zero. I mean, it's possible that, the guy who's being super promotional gets even more promotional. But I think that this is like 10, 12 billion is a pretty good time to short, because after a while, you just can't sustain a fake company that much more. So, like if you look at the history of tech and the history of biotech and other stuff like that, this is about the price where the market starts to say, okay, there's $1 million billion-dollar companies that are worthless right now. You could short a ton of them. You could find them. But once you get to 5 billion, the market starts scratching its head and saying, I don't know. Once you get to 10 billion, it's really hard to get a lot higher without substance. And substance comes in revenue. Substance comes in earnings. Substance comes in, real credible authorities saying this is something really useful. Again, the leaders in this field, including the founder of IonQ, think this is all is nonsense. Watch the IonQ founder, Chris Monroe, who I think is one of my like academic ideals. When I put my science hat on, which is a very small hat for me, I look up to Chris Monroe. When I put my finance hat, which is a little bit bigger, I look up to other people. But Chris has said, IonQ is going nowhere fast. He started the fucking company. So the new guy who's taking it over, he has a lot of stock options, which he's selling, by the way. He thinks that, it's gonna be bigger than Nvidia. But why is he selling 2 million shares then? If it's gonna be as big as Nvidia or bigger than Cisco. It's fucking nuts.
Hey Martin, I'm just curious. Have you seen this Defiance Quantum ETF?
Yeah. Look, I mean, this is another sort of like attempt to capitalize on idiots and their money. What do you think, AD?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. All right. So I work in the tech industry, and I have a lot of friends that work in the tech industry, and basically like all the big things that you've mentioned, and we do not see the talent sourcing for anything quantum. We don't see the investments in it. However, I do caution, shorting is very sketchy. I know you're a prolific educator in the financial industry, but a lot of these people who are going to try to go, all right, what do we do about this, right?
Yeah,
Like the
I'm
timing,
not telling.
the hedging.
I'm not saying
all of that.
anybody. I'm not saying anybody should go short it. That's for professionals. I know what I'm doing. I can handle it. If you got $10,000 and you're listening to me saying, "That Shkreli guy's smart. I should short this stock." Think twice about that. It's not that easy. Is that more or less what you're?
Yeah, overall, that's the trend that we're seeing in the industry is that, it's just not there. The only people who do talk about it in the industry know nothing about it. If you just, scratch the surface, very similarly to, the individual you debated and destroyed, it's just, there's nothing to it right now.
Yeah, there's nobody that's going to MIT and getting excited about quantum computing. Only the 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 physics dorks are really excited about it. Everyone else is doing AI, quant investing, etc. Somebody said that's because it's all black tier on my YouTube. No, the NSA is not that interested in quantum computing, believe it or not. The NSA is extremely good at hacking things, including via physical methods if necessary. They don't need a quantum computer, nor could they really make great use of it. What the NSA is mostly worried about, and this comes from Chris Monroe, the founder of IonQ, what they're mostly worried about is when do other people get quantum computing. The problem, again, is if you downloaded, let's say you were China and you hacked an underwater sea cable. Nothing I would ever think of doing, but let's say they did it. And they have the trunk line of AT&T, and they can see every secured packet of AT&T information. Well, it's not that simple to just take that and decrypt it and say, okay, here's Donald Trump's emails. It's a lot more complicated than that. And even quantum's not going to help you there. So I think that China's interested in this partially because of the signaling power as well. We're not landing on the moon anymore. This is the new moon landing. Writing a program and making a machine that can solve Shors is the new moon landing. The next moon landing will look different from that too. I don't know if it'll be teleportation or something crazy. I have no clue. But this is what the current moon landing looks like right now. And I think that it makes sense that China wants to do it first. It makes sense that our companies want to do it first. Like Microsoft, who can afford to have a zero. Microsoft's been working on quantum for 20 years, and most of the quantum space has laughed at them and said that they've actually said that Microsoft is the fraud. They've conjured the Majorana particle, which is a theoretical particle that is a new form of matter, and they said they've done it, and that they're going to use Majorana to do this braided anion, which is, again, extremely complicated physics, a braided anion topological qubit, and nobody believes them. It's Microsoft. But, they're the dark horse, and maybe they'll be right. I don't know. But the reason this is so exciting to these guys is it is the impossible challenge. Landing a rocket straight up in the middle of the ocean, catching a rocket in midair. These are the kinds of impossible challenges we're up to. So is using a quantum physics to calculate something it's up there. But again, you have to ask yourself, did the moon landing create any commerce? Was it a stock that you could have bought? No, it was just a really cool thing to do. And the economic activity had a second goal for the government, including motivation, spending, some other science that came of it. It didn't really directly impact and succeed for one company. And that's what we're talking about here. It's a really cool science trick. And I remember when human genome sciences, so somebody's asking me earlier, a second ago, if I forgot if it was Nick or somebody else, Joe said, aren't you afraid that this can get bigger? Well, I remember starting human genome sciences in 2000. And it was really funny. I just joined Wall Street. I had no clue what I was doing. But human genome sciences had a market cap of like 10-ish billion. And they just decoded the human genome. And you can imagine what the equivalent to IonQ stockholders, I hate to call them retail or lay people or whatever, amateur investors, they said, wow, human genome decoded, unbelievable. This is a huge stock. Well, just again, somebody that we know a lot more about genetics now than we did then, but to the average person, I said, I gotta buy $1,000 of that just in case. I gotta buy $10,000 of that just in case it's the next Pfizer, the next Merck. Merck is 200 billion. So why can't human genome sciences be 200 billion? And human genome sciences went to 500 million from 10 billion. It went down 95% because folks realized that there isn't a business in decoding a human genome, at least one of them, to then make drugs. People didn't want to buy the human genome information from them. They got it for free from the government. And it turns out that decoding a human genome doesn't turn you into a great drug company. Drugs are made a different way, and nothing changed in how the world makes drugs. Human genome actually successfully pivoted into being a normie drug company that had nothing to do with genetics, and they were able to exit for $2 billion, but still down 80% from their peak they set 15 years prior to when they got acquired, 10 years prior. So, to me, this is the right type of price where it's like the market at some point just sort of says, I can't really sustain buying this for 10 or 15 or 20 billion. It's very rare that there's a $50 billion fraud or $50 billion company that's completely useless. Theranos collapsed at around 10 billion. FTX collapsed around 10 billion. It's just one of these things where you can fake it till you make it, but after a certain while, it just doesn't add up and it'll collapse on itself. And I think these are companies that are houses of cards. And, the average person needs to be warned that quantum computing isn't the next NVIDIA. If you understand Shor's algorithm and you understand all this stuff and you still want to buy the stock, cool. You're digging your own grave, but knock yourself out. But if you think it's the next NVIDIA, you really just don't get it, and that's fine. But I'm hopefully explaining to you why it's not the next NVIDIA.
Now, Martin, I had a question on that note. You kind of answered this question already, just in what you said over the last few minutes, because you've described yourself as a quantum bear, and there's two ways we can take that, right? One is that it's just a question of valuation, and could also just be just pessimism about the future of the technology overall. I think you've mostly answered this, but maybe if I could just ask it, to what extent are you a quantum bear in that you're just hopeless about the technology, or are there maybe some companies for which it's just a question of evaluation, and in theory, they could reach just a more reasonable valuation in which they become investable?
It's a great question. Of course, whenever I make an investment, it's about valuation. Nobody wants to buy something that they think is worth less than what they're paying for, even if that means you have to look at some really far future date, which we do in investing. We do in biotech, for example. We look at cash flows 15, 20 years from now. We're just looking into a crystal ball, but it's not something we're not used to in technology. What does this look like a long time from now? So I think the two are really linked. And to me, I've tried to do the math of if the entire NSA budget went to quantum, would these stocks be worth it? And the answer is no. If you add up all the market caps, it's a pretty ugly situation. They could get the entire budget of NSA and still be wildly overvalued. And then the problem becomes, well, you only got a couple publicly traded quantum stocks. So if you like quantum, why aren't you in Quantinium? Why aren't you in IBM? Why aren't you in Google? Why aren't you in PsiQuantum, Alice and Bob, New Era? There's tons of privately held quantums. Well, the average person can't buy one of those stocks. You have to be rich to buy one of those stocks. You have to have millions of dollars. And even then, they may not let you in. So you get on the menu these cruddy companies that couldn't go public through an IPO. Rigetti, D-Wave, IonQ, and Quantum Computing Inc. None of these companies could go public through an IPO. All the bankers said no. Goldman Sachs isn't banking a quantum computing company. But now Morgan Stanley is banking them, to do secondaries and things like that. But they wouldn't bank them for an IPO. And the investors didn't want to buy it. So now you have this, these 4 publicly traded companies, but you have, 40 other ones. And what is the probability that it's IonQ that wins and not Quantinium? What's the probability that it's IBM and not IonQ? What's the probability that it's, Google or Microsoft as the dark horse? We don't know who's going to actually make a quantum computer that works. Maybe it's 3 of these companies, but it's not going to be all 40 of these companies that are winners. So randomly picking Rigetti or D-Wave or something like that, because they happen to be in this space, is no better than going to the horse race and picking a horse that you think looks good. So if you do love quantum, just buy all the stocks. But the problem is you can't buy all the stocks. 2 of them or 3 of them are parts of huge companies that won't move the needle anyway. And you run the serious possibility that those are the guys that win. Now, I like the small guys. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I think small companies often will outdo the big companies, but I wouldn't exactly sleep on Google either. They have the most quantum talent. They have the sharpest people, and they spend the most. But, Microsoft's spending $300 million a year, which again, for them is a rounding error, but the glory is something they're excited about. But I don't think I'd be betting on these sort of rinky-dink companies that happen to go public when I would try to bet on the place where there's a lot of talent, where they're actually making achievements, writing great papers. That's probably where I'd put my money. But again, those are stocks that you either can't buy because they're private, or they're parts of huge companies that are doing advertising or operating systems or cloud, and it's not going to help you to buy their stock. You're just going to be making a big bet on whatever it is they're actually doing and a tiny bet on quantum, which isn't going to make you any money. So what people want to do is they want to gamble. I mean, this is an environment where Fartcoin is up a lot, where there's all kinds of people gambling on all kinds of stuff, including nuclear fusion, which is not a space I know, and other things. And at the end of the day, nobody cares about what I'm talking about. What they care about is, can they get their rocks off gambling on a stock that's moving up and down a lot? And these stocks are moving up and down a lot. And so are the dot-com stocks, and so are the genomic stocks. But if you looked at them for more than 20 minutes, you'd realize, okay, it's all fun and games right now, but at some point they're just going to fall and collapse, and we're going to forget about them, and the musical chairs will be over. I don't like playing musical chairs. I like having a chair when the music stops. I like having the biggest chair. And, whether or not these shorts will be perfectly successful for me, so far they haven't. I've lost millions of dollars on these. But I think I'm going to come out on top at the end, just as I have before. And, buying these stocks and blindly holding them is a certain recipe for disaster. Now, could one of these companies come up with a miracle? Yeah, there's always that possibility. But again, without a crystal ball, all I can see is Shor's. And I just don't think the NSA or any other code breaker is that excited about this. And if you listen to the companies, they never mention Shor's. They're always talking about drug discovery, or which is really funny to me, or some other amorphous thing that's going to be really big, like AI. And again, talk to your friends at OpenAI or Google or Anthropic and ask them if they're excited about quantum. Their AI division, at least of Google. They're going to look at you like you're crazy. Nobody in AI is excited about quantum, nor are they excited about blockchain. There's just some technologies that don't go together. And, that's kind of the reality. But the companies take every chance they can get to compare themselves to NVIDIA, or to say there is quantum AI, or something like that. And it's just such a scary thing to watch because, you know, it's one thing to want to survive as a company. I've been in that place where I had a low balance sheet and I really needed to survive, but I never stooped to the point of lying about my company to raise money. I've stooped to pretty low points, but I've never stooped to that point. And I think that these companies are literally out there saying they're the next Cisco or the next NVIDIA. That's just plain lies. And these companies don't have a balance sheet problem. They don't have a survival problem. That's why I really like Rigetti, not as a stock, but just as ethics. The guy at Rigetti, the CEO, has just said, don't expect revenue from us. Don't expect miracles from us. Nobody has revenue in this space. This isn't a real space. It's a scientific space for now. It's all experimental. There's no business here. And he said that publicly over and over again. And he earns my respect for that. You know, I have the opposite of respect for Nicolo for going out there saying he's going to be the next Cisco with something called quantum networking. And then he has something called quantum space. And then there's another clown that said there's a quantum internet stack. I mean, this stuff is just ludicrous. It's more lies and lies and lies to make the average person who doesn't know any better get excited. And if you go to Bloomberg and type HDS or Yahoo Finance or I have software that does this called Godel, look at the holders lists of these stocks. And then try to call some of these people. Nobody likes these stocks. Nobody with who's paid to look at stocks likes these stocks. It's all people who've been suckered into buying them on Robinhood, people who've been suckered to buying them by going on Wall Street bets, things like that. If you talk to...
Martin, what about the California Teachers Union?
You know, one of the features of current modern day investing is we have indexes. And without indices, most of these stocks wouldn't exist. Indices cover every stock. So when you have billions or even trillions of dollars in indices, they kind of flow down to these stocks. And then you have quant funds. Quant funds trade these stocks without knowing what they do. Nobody at D.E. Shaw or Jane Street, firms I talk to all the time, I know one of the founders of Jane Street and many people who work there, nobody there is a fan of quantum. You know, so when you see Susquehanna or D.E. Shaw or Jane Street or Citadel owning one of these stocks, they're doing it, the only reason they would ever own it is to hedge their short call position where they're ripping off some idiot who's $10,000 in his Robinhood who buys one of these things. And again, these are really exciting stocks. They'll go up 10%, 15% for no reason. And the average guy who's working a construction job or is an auditor or whatever, it spices up their life. It's just as good as DraftKings. You know, you can put 10 grand in the stock and watch it swing and get a little dopamine. It's better than going to a casino. And maybe they'll be the next NVIDIA. Who knows, right? You know, this is the kind of world we're living in, and I feel like this is not the way I invest. You know, I mean, anybody who's doing that and is getting enjoyment out of it and it's entertainment to them, God bless them. You know, I think for a lot of people in the GameStop and AMC communities, they actually found, it was kind of sad to me, they found community and brotherhood in AMC. They said things like, apes strong together. And I'm sitting here like, I'm not trying to find community, I'm trying to find profits. You know, I don't care about the rest of people that own AMC or any stock that I own. I own a stock called Sarepta. I don't give a flying fuck about anybody else that owns Sarepta other than me. I answer to me, my wife, my baby, that's it. And, you know, but the AMC and GameStop people, they got a different utility function. They got camaraderie. They got a common cause, a weird brotherhood where they thought they were doing something that would hurt Wall Street. And, you know, if that's what it takes to lose 95% of your money and you think it's a fair trade, knock yourself out. You know, just being on the ride for some people is worth the price of admission. Professional investors or successful investors don't work that way. You know, professional investors aren't that excited about, you know, being there for the ride. In fact, the ride scares us. We don't want a ride. We want nice, smooth profits that are predictable and relatively mundane. If you want roller coaster stocks, this is the biggest roller coaster in a long time. And again, I've lost my hair and a few $1 million trying to tame the roller coaster, and I'm sure I will tame it. But it is one of these things that is crazy to watch. Now, the funniest part about all this is the fruitlessness of what I'm saying. For cassava stock, I warned everybody about it. It went down 95%. This was a biotech company that reportedly had an Alzheimer's treatment. I begged this guy, Matt Nacktrab, he's just at Matt Nacktrab on X. He lost $70 million. 70. It was his first biotech investment ever. He decides to go in for 70 M's. Look, I know some of the richest people in the world. Not even Bill Gates is doing that. And Bill Gates has a team of guys that, look at biotech stocks for him. He's got Boris, he's got a couple other dudes. And they're not chunking 70 million just like it's candy. They're doing serious work. Matt throws in for 70, loses it all. I'm literally begging him to stop. And just loses all of his money. And it's like glaring fraud at this company. They even arrested the chief scientific officer of Cassava, and he still went in. And so people like to gamble. And you can't tell them, I guess the point I'm making is, you can't tell anybody anything else. When people have made up their mind, it's the hardest thing in the world to get them to switch. Nobody wants to change their mind. It's so cognitively punitive to say I was wrong that humans just won't do it under any circumstance, especially men. It's just something that is so hard to come to terms with. And Matt Nacktrab would rather lose $70 million than say, I was wrong, Martin, you're right. I shouldn't just go balls into a biotech stock that I don't know anything about. I shouldn't go into I would ask him basic questions about, medicine. And he didn't know anything about medicine. He got basic concepts mixed up and stuff like that. That's fine. Look, new to medical investing, throw in $1 million, all right? Throw in $500,000. What's the big deal? Why do you need to go all in now? Learn the space. Put in a little bit of money, maybe you learn medicine, and maybe your next big bet can be 10 million or 50 million. But you want to jump in all in because, look, you're just gambling. You want to scratch the itch. He just sold his company for a ton of money. Maybe he had $1 billion, I don't know. But he wanted to flex on want to grow your account value. There's lots of other great stocks, but they're boring. they're not going to go 10x in a day. They're not going to go 10% a day. I'm in a stock called Sarepta, where I think I might make 80% over the next 2 years. To me, that's a lot. To me, that's huge. That's so exciting. It's my biggest long. But it's going to be a slog. It's a deep value stock that's been very much punished. And I might be right, I might be wrong, but I have some fair value that I don't think the company could be worth a lot less than, say, 30 or 40. It's at 40 right now. But I am under no illusion that this stock could ever be worth a 5x or 10x, let alone 100x. So if you're just looking for stuff that can 100x, you're playing a venture capital game with public companies. If you want 100x, you got to go into VC. You're not going to find them in publicly traded stocks. You're going to get one NVIDIA a decade, and it's going to be really hard to find that next NVIDIA, and certainly not these companies. But you can gamble if you want. It's just not what I do, and I focus on growing my account value, not just hoping and praying. The GameStop people have lost their homes. The AMC people, they're just sitting there like, we're still waiting for our short squeeze. We're still waiting for the company to do something. And we kept doubling down, and now we have no more money. My wife divorced me, and I don't know what to do. But for me, it's just too crazy. Hello. Lou. I'm just taking questions. Jamarco, Lou, anybody else have any last questions? We'll call it a day.
GameStop earnings today, going to the moon.
Yeah, let's see. I think for GameStop, even the CEO acknowledges it's not even about the game retailer anymore. It's about what acquisition can they do to grow the company, and he's not done a single acquisition. He's just sitting, waiting patiently, I guess. Some people wondering if he's waiting too patiently.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be great news. I'm actually supposed to cover them again pretty soon for the earnings release. So, but I think I was just asked to do it because it's a meme stock. But that's really it. It's the legacy of it at this point, right?
But when will he actually transform the business and buy another thing? I mean, he's buying Bitcoin, which is not exactly original. Is Bitcoin going to go up 10x? Is that the plan for GameStop? I just buy Bitcoin if that's the plan. I don't need this Messiah CEO, Ryan Cohen, who's very good apparently, he's not done anything in retail. If he's just buying Bitcoin, that's a big bummer to me. Like that's what we're all waiting for, a big Bitcoin thing. Buy MicroStrategy. All right, guys, thanks for listening. See you later.